Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The gun didn't shake in his hand. That was the most terrifying part. Julian stared down the barrel of the suppressed pistol, his back pressed against the cold, floor-to-ceiling glass of the penthouse suite, the lights of the city blurring into streaks of gold and crimson behind him. The man holding the weapon wasn't a stranger, nor was he an intruder who had slipped past the biometric security. He was the boy who had borrowed Julian's oversized hoodies for 3 years. He was the boy who scrambled eggs with too much pepper every Sunday morning. He was Kieran, the scholarship student, the charity case, the shy, stuttering roommate Julian had graciously allowed into his life. But the eyes staring back at Julian weren't shy. They were predatory, void of the trembling anxiety that had defined their college years. They were the eyes of a man who had finally stopped pretending. "I told you not to look in the drawer, Julian," Kieran said, his voice dropping an octave, stripping away the gentle lilt he'd used for years. He stepped closer, the muzzle of the gun lowering just an inch, aiming for Julian's kneecap. "I gave you everything. I gave you the illusion of control because I knew it was the only way you'd let me love you. Why did you have to ruin it by finding the truth?" Julian swallowed, the taste of copper and betrayal thick in his throat. "Who are you?" Kieran smiled, a dark, jagged expression that shattered Julian's heart. "I'm the man who owns you. I always have been." 3 years earlier, the rain in Seattle was less of a weather event and more of a persistent state of being. A gray curtain that draped over the University of Washington and dampened the spirits of anyone without a trust fund. Julian distinctively remembered the smell of wet wool and cheap instant coffee when he first opened the door to dorm room 402. He stood there, leaning against the doorframe in a bespoke cashmere sweater that cost more than most students' tuition, surveying the soaking wet creature shivering in the hallway. "You must be the roommate," Julian said, his voice bored, clipped. He didn't offer a hand. He didn't believe in touching things that looked damp. The boy nodded frantically, water dripping from his shaggy black hair onto a cardboard box that looked ready to disintegrate. "K. Kieran?" the boy stammered, clutching the box as if it contained the crown jewels. "Kieran Blackwood. I'm on the wait list for housing, but there was a mix-up, and they said I had extra space," Julian finished, rolling his eyes. He stepped back, gesturing vaguely into the expansive, upgraded suite his father's donations had secured. "Come in before you ruin the hallway carpet. My father sits on the board. I'd hear about the mildew damage for weeks." Kieran scurried in, looking around the suite with wide, doe-like eyes. He looked pathetic. He was thin, his clothes were thrift store rejects, and he radiated an aura of desperate gratitude that Julian found simultaneously annoying and oddly satisfying. Julian was used to people wanting things from him, money, status, connections. But Kieran looked like he just wanted a dry corner to exist in. "The left side is yours," Julian instructed, walking toward his own impeccably organized desk. "Don't touch my espresso machine unless you know how to decale it. Don't play loud music. And for God's sake, buy some decent detergent. If you smell like mildew, you're sleeping on the balcony." "Thank you," Kieran whispered, placing his soggy box on the floor. He looked at Julian with an intensity that should have been a warning sign, a flash of something too heavy for a stranger. "I won't be a burden. Promise. I'll do anything." Julian didn't look up from his laptop. "We'll see." The dynamic established itself with frightening ease. Julian was the sun, distant, burning, central, and Kieran was the satellite trapped in his gravity. It was a classic power dynamic, one that fed Julian's bruised ego, estranged emotionally from a cold, corporate father and a socialite mother who only called to critique his weight. Julian craved control, and Kieran gave it to him in spades. Kieran was the perfect roommate. He was invisible when Julian needed space, and present when Julian needed an audience. He took on the chores without being asked, scrubbing the floors until they gleamed, organizing Julian's chaotic law notes, and ensuring the fridge was stocked with the specific brand of sparkling water Julian preferred. But it was the broke aspect of Kieran that truly cemented the bond. "I can't go out tonight," Kieran would say, looking at his scuffed sneakers. "My shift at the library ran late, and I haven't been paid." Julian would sigh, feigning annoyance while pulling out his black card. "Get your coat. You look like a starved Victorian orphan." "I'm not eating alone." Kieran would beam, that shy, grateful smile lighting up his face. "You're too good to me, Julian. You save me every day." It was intoxicating. Julian became the provider, the protector. He bought Kieran clothes, paid for his meals, and eventually just started covering Kieran's share of the utilities. In return, Kieran offered absolute, unwavering loyalty. He alienated his own potential friends to hang around Julian. He glared at anyone who spoke ill of Julian. He was a clingy, desperate puppy, and Julian, in his arrogance, thought he held the leash. The first crack in the facade appeared 6 months in. It was a Tuesday, typically a gym night, but Julian had returned early with a migraine that felt like a railroad spike being driven through his temple. He unlocked the door silently, wincing at the click of the deadbolt. The apartment was dark, illuminated only by the glow of a laptop screen in the living room. Kieran was sitting there, but he wasn't studying. He was on a call. His posture was different. Gone was the slump of the shoulders, the submissive curve of the spine. Kieran sat rigid, one leg crossed over the other, his hand gesturing sharply in the air. "I don't care about the liquidation assets," Kieran said. His voice was cold, sharp, and devoid of the stutter. "Tell the syndicate that if they move into the Western Territory before I give the signal, I will personally gut the liaison. Do I make myself clear?" Julian froze in the foyer. "The syndicate? Gut the liaison?" Kieran paused, listening to the person on the other end. Then he laughed. A low, dark sound that made the hair on Julian's arms stand up. "No, I'm not coming back yet. I'm occupied. The asset is stable. He's unsuspecting. Yes, I have him exactly where I want him." Julian's heart hammered against his ribs. The asset. He should have turned around. He should have run. But Julian Vance was not a coward. He cleared his throat loudly, flipping on the foyer light. In a millisecond, the Kieran on the couch vanished. The boy scrambled, slamming the laptop shut, his shoulders hunching up, his eyes widening in panic. Julian," Kieran squeaked, standing up and wringing his hands. "You're home early. I was just listening to a drama audiobook. It's really intense." Julian narrowed his eyes, walking slowly into the room. The transition was flawless. Too flawless. "An audiobook? You were speaking." "Was I?" Kieran laughed nervously, scratching the back of his neck. "I guess I was practicing lines? For drama class." "You're a biology major, Kieran." "Electives," Kieran blurted out. He rushed to the kitchen. "I'll make you tea. Chamomile? For your head? You look pale." Julian watched him go. The suspicion planted a seed in his gut, a cold, writhing thing. He watched Kieran bustle around the kitchen, the submissive droop of his head returning. It was just a game, Julian told himself. He's a weird kid. He was probably role-playing online. But that night, as Julian drifted off to sleep, he felt a presence by his bed. He kept his eyes shut, his breathing even. He felt fingers brush the hair from his forehead, a touch that was tender and possessive. "Sleep well, my prince," Kieran whispered in the darkness, the stutter gone again. "Build your walls as high as you want. I'm already inside." The escalation over the next year, the atmosphere in the apartment shifted from domestic to suffocating. Kieran's clinginess evolved. It wasn't just about being around Julian anymore. It was about isolating him. When Julian started dating a girl from his econ class, Kieran fell ill with a mysterious fever that required Julian to stay home and nurse him. When Julian planned a weekend trip with his old prep school friends, Kieran accidentally shrank Julian's favorite designer shirts in the wash and wept so pitifully that Julian canceled the trip out of sheer guilt. And the money. Things didn't add up. Julian noticed that while Kieran claimed to be broke, eating instant noodles when Julian wasn't looking. The items in Kieran's room were changing. A watch left on the nightstand that looked suspiciously like a Patek Philippe. A fountain pen that Julian knew cost $3,000. When asked, Kieran claimed they were knockoffs or gifts from an estranged uncle. Julian wanted to believe him. He needed to believe him. Because if Kieran wasn't the broke, helpless boy who needed Julian, then who was he? And what was Julian to him? The breaking point came during their final semester. Julian's father, a titan of industry named Marcus Vance, was under investigation for embezzlement. The assets were frozen. Julian's cards were declined. For the first time in his life, Julian Vance was destitute. He came home to the apartment, dazed, a decline receipt crumpled in his hand. He sat on the sofa, burying his face in his hands. The illusion of his power had shattered. He couldn't pay the rent. He couldn't buy food. He couldn't support himself, let alone his charity case roommate. Julian. Kieran's voice was soft. He kneeled in front of Julian, placing his hands on Julian's knees. What's wrong? It's over. Julian laughed bitterly. My father. Everything is frozen. I have nothing, Kieran. I can't pay for this place. We're going to be on the street. I can't help you anymore. He expected panic. He expected Kieran to cry about where he would go. Instead, Kieran went still. Slowly, a smile spread across his face. It wasn't a comforting smile. It was a smile of absolute, terrifying triumph. You have nothing? Kieran asked, his voice steady. Nothing. So, Kieran murmured, sliding his hands up Julian's thighs, his grip tightening. You have no one to rely on but me? Julian looked up, confused. Kieran, you don't understand. You're broke. I was supporting us. Kieran stood up. He walked to the bedroom, his bedroom, the one Julian rarely entered, and returned a moment later. He tossed a thick, heavy envelope onto the coffee table. It landed with a dull thud. Julian reached out, opening the flap. Inside were stacks of $100 bills. At least 50,000. Where? Julian stared at the cash. Where did you get this? Did you steal it? Did you sell drugs? Does it matter? Kieran asked. He walked over to the wet bar, Julian's wet bar, and poured himself a drink. He didn't ask. He moved with a languid grace that Julian had never seen before. The rent is paid, Julian. The bills are covered. You don't have to worry about your father. In fact, Kieran took a sip, his eyes glinting over the rim of the glass. The investigation into your father is going to get much worse before it gets better. He won't be able to help you for a very, very long time. The realization hit Julian like a physical blow. The specific details of the investigation, the timing, the way Kieran wasn't surprised. You, Julian breathed. You did this. Kieran shrugged. I made a few calls. Your father is a corrupt man, Julian. He didn't deserve you. I merely accelerated his inevitable downfall. Who are you? Julian stood up, his anger warring with fear. Sit down, Julian. No. I want answers. You've been lying to me for 3 years. You pretended to be poor. You pretended to be weak. I pretended. Kieran interrupted, his voice booming, cracking like a whip across the room. Because you are an arrogant, broken creature who only knows how to connect with people beneath him. If I had walked in here as Kieran Blackwood, heir to the Blackwood Syndicate, you would have been terrified. You would have put up your guard. But the poor, stuttering scholarship boy? Him you would take in. Him you would keep. Julian backed away, hitting the glass window. The memory of the gun from the flash-forward wasn't reality yet. But the threat was there, hanging in the air. You're insane, Julian whispered. I'm devoted, Kieran corrected. He closed the distance between them, trapping Julian against the glass. He placed a hand on the window beside Julian's head. I've watched you for years, Julian. Before college. At the galas your parents dragged you to. You looked so lonely. I wanted to give you a purpose. I let you take care of me. I let you feel strong. And now, Kieran leaned in, his lips brushing Julian's ear. Now that you've lost your false power, we can finally have a real relationship. One where you admit that you need me just as much as I need to possess you. The escape attempt. Julian didn't accept it. Not then. 3 days later, he tried to run. He packed a bag while Kieran was in the shower. He disabled the location tracking on his phone. He made it to the lobby of the apartment building, his heart pounding in his throat. A black sedan pulled up to the curb the moment he stepped outside. The window rolled down. 2 men in dark suits sat inside. They didn't look like Uber drivers. They looked like soldiers. "Mr. Vance," the driver said, not a question. "Mr. Blackwood asked us to ensure you didn't get lost. The city is dangerous tonight." "I'm not going with you," Julian said, backing toward the doorman. But the doorman, usually friendly chatterbox Ralph, was nowhere to be seen. "Please, Mr. Vance." The passenger side door opened. A man stepped out, massive and scarred. "Don't make this difficult. Kieran would be very upset if we had to bruise you." Julian turned to run back into the building, but the elevator doors pinged open. Kieran stepped out. He was wearing a suit, impeccably tailored, charcoal gray, screaming wealth and violence. He checked his watch, looking bored until he saw Julian. "Going somewhere, love?" Kieran asked. Julian froze. The lobby felt like a cage. "Let me go, Kieran." Kieran sighed, walking over to him. He reached out, grabbing Julian's chin, forcing him to look up. "Go where?" "Your father is in federal custody as of an hour ago. Your mother is in the Hamptons pretending she doesn't know him. Your accounts are zeroed out. Out there you are prey. In here, with me, you are a king." "I'm a prisoner," Julian spat. "Semantics," Kieran murmured. He leaned down, kissing Julian hard, possessive and bruising. Julian tried to push him away, but Kieran's grip was iron. The weak roommate was gone. This man was made of steel and blood. "Let's go upstairs. I made dinner, and if you try to leave again, I'll have to chain you to the bed." "Don't test me, Julian. You know I have abandonment issues." The confrontation the weeks that followed were a blur of luxury and terror. Kieran didn't hide anymore. He ran his empire from the living room. Men came and went, bowing to the scholarship student. They discussed shipments, territory wars, and rivals disappearing. Julian sat in the corner, reading books, drinking expensive wine, and watching the man he thought he knew dissolve into a monster. Yet, the confusing part, the part that kept Julian up at night, was that Kieran was still Kieran. He still made Julian's coffee. He still rubbed Julian's shoulders when he was tense. He still looked at Julian with that terrifying adoration. "Why me?" Julian asked one night. It was raining again, echoing the day they met. Kieran looked up from a dossier of photographs. "What? You could have anyone," Julian said, gesturing to the opulent prison around them. "You have money, power, looks. Why play the pathetic roommate for 3 years? Why go through all that humiliation?" Kieran stood up and walked to the window where Julian was sitting. The city lights reflected in his dark eyes. "Because you were the only one who looked at me and saw a person, not a weapon," Kieran said softly. "Even if you did it out of arrogance. Even if you did it to feed your own ego. You cared. You bought me soup when I was sick. You fought a guy at the bar who spilled a drink on me. You protected me." Kieran knelt, resting his head on Julian's lap. It was a submissive pose, but the power dynamic had permanently shifted. "In my world, Julian, everyone wants to kill me or use me. You just wanted me to clean the dishes and keep you company. It was the only peace I've ever known." Julian looked down at the dark head of hair resting on his knee. His hand hovered, trembling. He should hate him. He should strike him. This man had ruined his life, dismantled his family, and trapped him. But Julian was tired. He was tired of the cold expectations of his parents. He was tired of the fake friends who vanished when the money dried up. He looked at Kieran, the monster who burned the world down just to keep Julian warm. Slowly, Julian's fingers threaded through Kieran's hair. Kieran shuddered at the touch, letting out a breath he seemed to have been holding for years. "My father," Julian said quietly. Is he really guilty? He stole millions from the pension fund, Kieran mumbled into Julian's thigh. I just handed the evidence to the FBI. I didn't frame him. I just exposed him. Julian closed his eyes. And if I stay? If I stop running? Kieran looked up, his eyes shining with a dangerous, fanatical hope. Then I will give you the world, Julian. I will burn down anyone who touches you. You will never be cold, never be hungry, never be lonely again. You will be the only thing I answer to. The climax, the peace was fragile. It shattered 2 weeks later when the past came knocking. Julian was alone in the penthouse, a rare occurrence, when the security system failed. The lights flickered and died. The magnetic locks disengaged. 3 men burst in. They weren't Kieran's men. They wore masks and carried tactical shotguns. Rivals. The people Kieran had been hiding from when he first adopted his disguise. Find the boy, one shouted. Blackwood's weakness. Julian scrambled back, overturning a table, retreating into the kitchen. He grabbed a knife, his hands shaking violently. He wasn't a fighter. He was a rich kid who took Pilates. The men cornered him. The leader ripped the mask off. A scarred, ugly face. So this is the pet? Pretty. Blackwood is going to lose his mind when we send him your fingers. Julian slashed out with the knife, catching the man on the arm. The man roared, backhanding Julian across the face. Julian hit the floor, tasting blood, darkness swimming in his vision. Hold him down, the leader growled, pulling out a serrated blade. The front door didn't open. It exploded. Wood and metal shrapnel showered the room. Through the smoke, a figure walked in. Kieran. But he wasn't holding a gun. He was holding a sword. A sleek, black katana that looked ancient and thirsty. Get away from him, Kieran said. His voice wasn't loud. It was a whisper that carried the weight of a grave. The men turned. Blackwood. We have the boy. Drop the... Kieran moved. He was a blur of violence. There was no hesitation, no mercy. He didn't fight like a thug. He fought like a master, precise and surgical. The first man fell clutching his throat. The second tried to fire his shotgun, but Kieran was already inside his guard, the sword flashing in the dim light. The leader grabbed Julian, hauling him up as a human shield, pressing the knife to Julian's throat. Back off, or I slit his throat. Kieran stopped. He stood amidst the carnage of his living room. Blood splattered across his white dress shirt, his chest heaving. His eyes locked onto Julian's. There was no fear in them, only a calculating, icy rage. You touched him, Kieran said. You put your filthy hands on him. Drop the sword, the leader screamed, pressing the blade harder. A trickle of blood ran down Julian's neck. Kieran didn't drop the sword. He smiled. Julian, do you trust me? Julian looked at the man who had lied to him, trapped him, and obsessed over him. He looked at the bodies on the floor. He felt the cold steel against his neck. Yes, Julian whispered. Duck. Julian dropped his dead weight, sagging toward the floor. In the fraction of a second that his head cleared the path, a throwing knife flew from Kieran's left hand. A hidden blade he hadn't even seen Kieran draw. It embedded itself in the leader's eye. The man screamed, dropping Julian and staggering back. Kieran was on him instantly. It was over in seconds. Silence fell over the penthouse, broken only by the sound of rain against the shattered windows. Kieran dropped the sword. He rushed to Julian, falling to his knees, his bloody hands hovering, afraid to touch. Julian, Kieran gasped, his eyes scanning the cut on Julian's neck. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have been here. Did they hurt you? I'll kill their entire families. I'll burn their city to ash. Julian looked at Kieran. He saw the monster. He saw the blood. But he also saw the terrifying love that had saved his life. The realization settled in his bones, heavy and final. He couldn't go back to the normal world. He didn't fit there anymore. He had been shaped by Kieran's gravity for too long. Julian reached out, taking Kieran's blood-stained face in his hands. He didn't flinch at the gore. You missed a spot, Julian whispered, wiping a smudge of red from Kieran's cheek with his thumb. Kieran froze, leaning into the touch, closing his eyes like a starving animal being fed. I'll clean it. I'll clean everything. No, Julian said, his voice gaining strength. The fear was gone, replaced by a dark acceptance. He pulled Kieran closer, until their foreheads touched. Just make sure the door is locked next time. Kieran's eyes snapped open, wide with disbelief and rapture. You're staying. Where else would I go? Julian asked, glancing at the bodies. My roommate is a psychopath, but he makes excellent coffee. Kieran let out a broken, relieved laugh, burying his face in Julian's neck, right over the pulse point. I love you. I worship you, Julian. I know, Julian replied, looking out at the city lights, finally accepting the cage. Now get up, Kieran. We have a mess to clean. And that is how the prince learned to love the monster who burned down his castle. If you enjoyed watching Julian accept his dark destiny, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive a liar if he burned the world down just to save you? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then,